Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 599th Imagine Greater Buffalo program, as well as our 220th YouTube production, all hosted by our wonderful downtown Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN, as I like to pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation as time allows. We are recording this program, so you can watch it again later on the Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channel. And please, we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speakers. Joining us today are Dr. Barbara Seals Nevergold and Tala Harden. Dr. Nevergold is a historian and the co-founder of the Uncrowned Queens Institute. Tala is a videographer whose business, telegraphy, focuses on storytelling through digital media, photography, and videography. They are here today to discuss the recent documentary And a Shot Rang Out, which is about Buffalo's connection to the Tulsa Race Massacre back in 1921. Dr. Nevergold and Tala, please start us off by telling us a bit about yourselves and how you came to this project. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I came to the project because I found the connection with Mr. Andrew Jackson Smitherman and the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. And I'm going to talk more about what that connection was, but that interested me so much that I began to study and research Mr. Smitherman and his life before the Tulsa Race Massacre, during, and then afterward, which leads to his connection to Buffalo.
Good. Tala, do you want to give us just a little background? There's an interesting connection here. Let's hear about it.
Sure, of course. Hi, I'm Tala Harden. I am currently the marketing specialist at Visit Buffalo, but last year I was working at the Buffalo History Museum, which is where I learned about Mr. Smitherman. That got me connected to Dr. Nevergold, who's on the board at the History Museum. And we started off by doing what we thought was going to be a 5-minute social media video, but then it turned into a documentary. And so much has come out of it. There's a deep Buffalo connection, and it extends into a lot of the history and heritage in Buffalo. The story is truly incredible, and it shows you that there's a Buffalo connection nearly everywhere.
Looking forward to hearing about it. Take it away. Let's hear it.
Okay, well, I've got a short presentation here. Again, talking about Andrew J. Smitherman. And here you see Mr. Smitherman. He was an extraordinary individual who suffered tremendous loss in the catastrophe of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And it's his story that around which the documentary pivots. So next. I learned about Mr. Smitherman kind of by happenstance. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the co-founder of the Uncrowned Queens Institute, and in 2003, we invited a woman by the name of Eddie Faye Gates to come to Buffalo. She was a member of the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, language changes. So at that time in 2003, that's what it was called. And she was the chair of the Survivors Committee, doing a lot of interviews with survivors and their families. And she just happenstance said in her presentation that she had interviewed the daughter of the newspaperman here in Buffalo who had been part of the race massacre. And that got me interested in who this person was and how he connected to the massacre. Next. So Mr. Smitherman, as you know, was born in 1883 and actually in Alabama, and moved with his family to Tulsa, or not to Tulsa, to Oklahoma Territory, when he was a teenager, about 16. He got engaged in newspaper work in 1908 as the editor of the Scimitar in Muskogee. And then he began to establish his own identity as a newspaperman, opening up the Muskogee Star in 1912 and then moving to Tulsa in 1913. And the Tulsa Star, at one point, he did a daily African-American newspaper, which was the first to be published in the nation. Next. He championed many causes, and he was really a very proactive journalist, not just a journalist, but a community builder and someone who challenged white supremacy in many different ways, at times putting his own life, on the line. And, this is a very short presentation, so I don't have a chance to talk about that, but I have written a lot about him thus far. Next. On May 30th, a young man by the name of Dick Rawlin was accused of assaulting or trying to assault a young white woman in downtown Tulsa. He was arrested, brought to jail, and from there, rumors began to circulate that he was endangered and that he was going to be lynched. On the night of May 31st, Andrew Smitherman, among other men, went to the jailhouse in Tulsa to offer their support to the sheriff to protect Dick Rawlin. That support was rejected, and ultimately the race massacre began when a struggle for a rifle sent a shot off. And as the sheriff said, all hell broke out. Next. Between May 31st and June 1st, 1921, the massacre occurred. And here you see some of the pictures from the carnage and people who were displaced, as well as property damaged. Next. The destruction of what we now call Black Wall Street, Tulsa, was absolutely enormous. You can see here the number of acres of the Greenwood neighborhood, which was called Black Wall Street, which we call Black Wall Street now. Millions of dollars lost in property. Looting occurred. There's an estimated 300 African Americans who were killed during that riot, and thousands who left Tulsa actually for good. Next. Next. They convened a grand jury. You can see here in June 6th of 1921, just a week or so after the massacre. And during that grand jury, they indicted some 79 Blacks, including Andrew Smitherman, for inciting the riot. Smitherman was arrested. He was allowed to go free, but he knew that he would be rearrested and not only charged, but tried for inciting this massacre. And so he left the state. He fled Tulsa. Next. Immediately, when he left Tulsa, he went to Boston, and he tried to pick up some of the pieces of his life with his family. He had 4 children and his wife, but he wrote about what he encountered and what had happened in Tulsa, about the loss of life, the loss of property, white supremacy, and what had occurred as a result. And during that time, there were 3 warrants for his arrest that had been issued by several states, governors. And this gentleman, Richard Lloyd Jones, editor of the Tulsa Tribune, who was also a cousin of Frank Lloyd Wright, sent out to the governor of Massachusetts and states saying, arrest Smitherman stop bad actors, stop him from writing. This was about 1924, so Mr. Smitherman left Tulsa. Next. And in 1925, he came to Buffalo, New York. And from 1925 until 1961, time of his death, he opened up a newspaper called the Buffalo Star. And later on, the same newspaper changed its name, Empire Star. I'm not sure why. But from 1932, when the Buffalo Star opened, until Smitherman's death, 1961, he published this paper. But it wasn't just the paper that he published. He was very engaged in the community. He ran for Buffalo councilman. He was active in organizations like the YMCA and the Democratic Club. He was a member of the board of the Michigan Avenue YMCA. And he was an extraordinary individual, said, who not only was productive and contributory in the state of Oklahoma, but even after the catastrophe that he experienced in Oklahoma, he continued and came back, and like a phoenix, he rose from the ashes to become contributory to his new home in Buffalo. He also was a poet and wrote a classic poem in which basically he describes what happened during the night of May 31st and June 1st, 1921. Here you see him at his desk. One of the reasons I was able to learn so much about Mr. Smitherman was that he began to write his autobiography in 1960, 61, and he serialized it in the newspaper. He wrote about 30 some odd episodes, installments of that autobiography. Unfortunately, he died at his desk in 1921 as he was writing one of his entries, and he did not get to the Tulsa Race Massacre and describe more fully his role in that event. So unfortunately, we were left without that information. Next. In 2007, Peggy Brooks Bertram and I began a project to become a project to celebrate the centennial of the state of Oklahoma's statehood. And in doing that, we were the only out-of-state organization accepted. We wrote a book with, and we can go on to the next one, that celebrated African-American queens in Oklahoma. And we met, again, Eddie Faye Gates, along with some of the survivors of the race riots. And in doing that, I became more interested in trying to clear Mr. Smitherman of the charge of inciting the riot, given his contributions, giving everything that he did in Oklahoma as well as in New York State. I thought it was time that we tried to revisit that. And I wrote to the DA, Tim Harris, asking him to reconsider looking at expunging Mr. Smitherman's record of that indictment. Not only did he do that, he also expunged the records of 54 other Black men whose records had been on the rolls for so many years, over 80 years. Next. And in doing that, preparing for that expungement hearing, I talked to a number of residents in Buffalo at that time who still remembered Mr. Smitherman, and I asked them to share those remembrances so that I could share that with the court when I went to the hearing. Next. And here you see the expungement proceedings, December 11th, 2007. Also happened to be the date of the worst ice storm in the history of Oklahoma at that time. I think we can relate given the weather we're experiencing now. But we did get to the hearing, and this is at the Greenwood Cultural Center. Next. This is the official formal expungement that again, was part of the hearing. Mr. Harris spoke. The judge again filed the motion, accepted the motion, and Mr. Smitherman's record, along with the other men, now has been formally expunged. Next. And I'll just wrap up here with a flyer produced in 2021. Of course, Oklahoma was commemorating the centennial of that massacre. I won't say celebrating, they were acknowledging and continue to acknowledge the far-reaching implications and aspects of the race massacre and what we can learn from what happened over 100 years ago. And here you see on the left, Mr. Smitherman and his family at the time of the race massacre, and some of the other symbolism are some of the other photographs that symbolize the destruction and the historic nature of that event. And that ends. And so we can talk about how all of this, I think Tala gave you some background of how all of this began to formulate the basis for a documentary that Tala has created. And at this point, I'd like to go back and turn this over to you, Dennis, so we can talk a bit about the documentary.
Good. That was good. Tala, do you have some role here that you wanted to describe before we go in that direction or not?
I'll just say that the documentary touches on a little bit more about what Dr. Nevergold said, some other key parts of Black history in Buffalo, as well as kind of like where we left off and why this is important for the younger generation to know, to learn, and then to keep telling the next generation to come after that.
Well, you lead into my basic question. Here we are celebrating USA 250, and for years I've heard how we feel, those especially in the area of history, that we don't seem to do enough to energize younger people in school to care about history. That would be here's an incident that happened. It's about our history, and you were drawn to explore it. And I'm just curious, what is that just unique to people like yourself as a historian, or what are your thoughts about how we teach history, or is it just this happenstance that people get interested and then we learn something about it from the History Channel or a program like this? I'm throwing it up to the two of you, actually, because you do cover two generations. And I'd be interested in an answer. I think it's important to hear your thoughts about that.
Definitely. I do have to say, I think it's funny when people refer to me as a historian. I, growing up, was not interested in history. Like, that was one of my worst grades of all time. It just was the class that I didn't really click with. So, certain topics I'd be interested in, other ones, they didn't really stick around with me. But as the years went on, and especially experiencing COVID, I just started to explore different things. Eventually, that led me to a job at the History Museum. So then I was confronted with all sorts of history every single day. And it was a more exciting adventure than I thought it would be. And then I discovered that Buffalo is a super historic space. We're still a landmark to this day for our architecture, our music, the Erie Canal. There are so many amazing things that make Buffalo a historic landmark. And I didn't know any of that growing up because I really wasn't paying attention in history class. So I think for the younger generation, and just from my perspective, you have to find interest in something, and then you're just going to keep growing on and on. I have my background in film and TV production, so a lot of my stuff is like, I've seen a lot of old period pieces, and that got me interested in the stories and learning more. So that's how I got into making it into a documentary as well. I wanted to make it a little bit more visually stimulating for people my age who want to get more interested into history, but reading a textbook isn't their favorite thing to do.
You touched on making things interesting. I'm sure things were taught, but whether they were received or not is the question.
Yes,
Barbara,
yeah, I'd agree.
How would you add to that, Barbara, from your experience?
Well, the thing is that things weren't taught. I mean, the Tulsa Race Massacre is not the only incident where white supremacy reared its ugly head and where Black communities were destroyed and Black lives were taken. There are many other incidents of this. However, some of them or all of them are hidden or not fully explored. One of the things about Tulsa is that there are many people in Tulsa who will tell you that they grew up in the city never knowing or hearing about the massacre. So for them, it was, was a major thing to learn that their city had been engulfed by such a tragic event. And so I think that, again, in looking at the curriculum in the schools, there are a lot of incidences, historic sites, historic events that are not covered at all, that are not acknowledged at all. And I appreciate what Tala had to say about how she approached, this particular incident and how she would approach other historic incidences in trying to convey through means that students now, understand much better than we do. It's not just a book, a book event. You have to offer students more stimulating and more interesting ways, more creative ways of sharing the history in order for them to get interested and to understand.
Good, good. I have one more question, but I want to make sure if we're getting any questions from the audience. But I'll mention it to you. How did the spirit of entrepreneurship, if you know or have suggestions, how did it develop in Tulsa and not other cities as nearly as much? You call it the Wall Street. How did that happen? Why there? Do you have any sense of that background?
In the Black Wall Street. Well, for one thing, Tulsa was Tulsa sat on oil fields in Oklahoma. And so it was a city where there was a lot of wealth, a lot of money. And I think it attracted people because of that. But it also is not unusual in other cities, again, to see Black people who are entrepreneurs and who started businesses and who, are achieving and who are, thriving as a result of their work, and in spite of discrimination that they encounter. So, but the uniqueness of Tulsa, I can't explain it entirely, but I think it certainly had something to do with the fact that the city had a lot of wealth because of the oil fields.
Well, that's interesting of that sort. All right, we should open it up. Joy, or yeah,
Yep.
any questions?
Yes, we have a couple of things. First of all, someone just put in the chat, I'm watching this for my history in the 7th grade. So thank you for doing that. A couple of things I do want to say is I had an opportunity, and I guess it must have been a little less than a year ago at the History Museum to see and a shot rang with Dr. Nevergold and Talia speaking, and someone also, a relative came and talked about this whole situation, someone that still lives here. So that was enlightening, and I feel fortunate that I was able to see that. I do want to share my screen while I ask the next question, because we want to let people know, and hopefully this is up on the screen, that both of our speakers are doing a presentation showing the film and discussing on Saturday, February 21st, here at the Downtown Central Library. The film screening and a conversation, and we'd love for people on this call today to attend that and bring more questions and see the actual video, because it's quite extraordinary. The other question I have was, Smitherman was, I'll use the word extraordinary again, an extraordinary individual, and made a lot of contributions to this area. What was happening in Buffalo at that same time?
You mean in 1921?
When he came here and ran for council and became very active, what was going on here? And he obviously came and was fully accepted, which is good for Buffalo. I'm not sure if those kinds of things continued over the decades, but
I think few people knew about his background and about the Tulsa Race Massacre. From what I find out, he didn't talk about it. And I know Tala has talked with Ishmael Reed, who worked in the newspaper office with Smitherman, and maybe she wants to share a little bit about that conversation.
Yeah, he actually said he had no idea until after they had stopped working together that there was a connection to Tulsa. And that was when he came across a photo of Mr. Smitherman in front of a truck that said the Tulsa Star. And that linked him to start doing a whole lot of research, kind of how it took our brains to go back and look. But he said that he dedicated his life to running the newspaper and to being a community leader, that he would find him asleep sometimes, like at the desk, having papers circulated all around him. That became kind of his escape, was just to keep on writing. I mean, I guess from like an outside perspective, that could be him almost as a burden or a torture within himself to just kind of keep documenting different things. But also for the positive spin, I know at the Nash House, there was a great connection between him and Reverend Nash. One of the quotes that Dr. Nevergold chose was from, I believe it was Dr. or Reverend Nash's son. So there was an amazing connection there in that Black Wall Street that we had here in Buffalo, our smaller version. But I know that he found himself thriving on Broadway in Buffalo. And I don't know a lot about his history in Buffalo, but I know that it was two extremes. One, a driven community leader, and then the other one, just the fearful newspaper editor.
And I think he was an affable man, from what I understand too. So, so he was well liked, and people, saw his ability, his creativity through his poetry, because he included some poems from time to time that he had written in the newspaper, as well as a little volume that I know you have there, a copy of that in the library, called The Treasure Trove, which is a volume of poems that he wrote, and that had an introduction by Reverend Nash.
okay. And then the final question I have is, Dr. Nevergold, what else can you tell us about the uncrowned queens?
Well, the Uncrowned Queens, started by Dr. Peggy Brooks Bertram and myself, really is a program to identify, to collect, to write, and to preserve the histories of African American community builders, both women and men as well. And as of February 15th of this year, we are celebrating our 25th anniversary as an organization.
Congratulations to you. I do have one more comment that came in from Marcia. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As an art and architectural docent, I very much appreciate that Buffalo is a fountain of history. Please, all of you, continue to inform us about long buried events and people whose names, let alone their contributions, we would never hear.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia.
Dr. Nevergold, I'm just going to push you a little bit on that uncrowned queens again. Was it the massacre itself? And it's still not clear what it is that 25 years ago you said we've got to organize ourselves and tell this story. Was it the massacre? Was it women?
No, 25 years ago, it was the centennial celebration of the Pan American Exposition of 1901. And particularly the roles that Black women played in that, in that exposition.
And then that led, and the connection again with the Tulsa Massacre. That's what I missed.
The connection again with the Tulsa Massacre came because of our connection with Oklahoma, the women there, and recognizing that we had a further connection with an individual who had been instrumental, or an instrumental figure in the Tulsa Race Massacre, who ultimately settled in Buffalo, where again he was influential and contributory to life in Buffalo.
Oh, good. And is this paper, is that available to the public for either purchase or is it online?
It is not online yet, but we are in the process of updating our webpage, at which time we will then have those articles online.
Nice. Very nice.
Thank you for asking.
Well, that's, I want to point to these things. It's a great way to make these connections. I can't imagine how many other connections exist outside of Buffalo from family members that I'm sure the history, your exposure, Tala, to the History Museum, open your eyes, literally. Good fortune for you. It's not everybody's good fortune, but I guess our hope with this program has always been it's a digital age, and books are great, but we're a visual society. So I was very glad when COVID helped make this a YouTube production by the library. But I've got audio recordings of all the lectures. It makes me think, and it will ask Joy, but that program you've got coming up on the 15th, it'd be nice if they could make a video recording. I'll check my schedule. If I can be there, I'll do an audio recording at the very least. That's on the 21st, Saturday from 1:30 to 2:45 at the library in the Ring of Knowledge. We've got to convert our thoughts and our experience, our historical experiences into digital content, both visual and audio, just so we reach the public that uses digital communications certainly as much, if not more so, than reading books. All important, all of the above is what we have to do as lifelong learners, I guess. All right, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you both very much for helping us understand Buffalo's connection with that terrible event in 1921. Unfortunately, we continue to have terrible events from time to time that we recover from and hopefully progress from. All right, thank you, folks, for joining us today. Hope you'll join us next week for our 600th episode of the Imagine program, and that'll be February 3rd on Zoom. We'll be joined by Douglas DeCroy. Now, Doug is the executive director of the publication I'm sure Western New Yorkers are familiar with, Western New York Heritage, the magazine. Doug will also be the recipient, the 2026 recipient of the Imagine Greater Buffalo person who's helped in the background, helped us imagine our history so we, looking back, can better imagine our future looking forward. So join us then with Doug DeCroy, and we'll hear all about the behind the scenes of the Western New York Heritage magazine that they've been publishing for years now. All right, thanks, folks. Be well, stay warm, and have a good day.